All right, so let this be a cautionary tale for everyone. One that I think has to be repeated from time to time because for some reason things aren't getting any better. They seem to be going worse. I'm talking about what I would call the psychotech CEOs problems. Those who are going after all sorts of extent of doing weird, at times illegal things to get their point across and getting things moving. So all of this came back because as many, I was watching the documentary about OceanGate on Netflix. Very good piece, by the way. Now, for those of you who don't know, OceanGate was a company that was working on building a submarine for tourism purposes. They wanted to be showing to people the Titanic, which is a very, very low, very, very high depth, very, very high pressure. So you need a special vessel. A super long story short, under the guidance of their CEO, they built something that just imploded, killing 5 people. But the documentary was trying to give us an insight on how things were going behind the scenes. And I thought this was quite interesting because as I was watching this, I was thinking, I've been there. I worked in a situation like these people, and the parallel, it was absolutely incredible. Now, I think that the biggest problem of these kinds of documentaries is that, you know, it very quickly falls into this inspiration without action that becomes fundamentally entertainment for everybody. And the story repeats itself, right? So you have Elizabeth Holmes and the fraud she did with Theranos, SBF with FTX, the list goes on. There's just like a never-ending flock of these people. I use these people as an example in conversation when I would have a founder who would be frustrated that they haven't raised an amount of money or that they haven't got an amount of publicity. And I, you know, to basically just give them some perspective that, you know, there's this other side of the coin where you also see people having this kind of success, but it's entirely based on cheating and manipulating and lying and fraud and all these different things. So the reason I'm having a smile is because there were some absolutely magnificent nuggets in this documentary and stuff that I'm going to be using because I have a cheeky side of me. But for instance, there was this moment where as the hull of the submarine was starting to crack in the early tests, there was this younger woman who was asking questions, part of the team, and the CEO was telling her that the carbon fiber was seasoning. And I think I'm going to start calling it seasoning any kind of things that is going wrong, that you know is going wrong, but you're trying to wrap it up just as a joke, because this one is just absolutely magnificent. The part that is a lot less funny is I have worked in companies like this, and you know there's been this trend of founders that have been evolving, and I would say I tied up to around 2014, 2015. It was really the moment where the golden free money came into the tech world, specifically in the US, and we started to see a flock of what I would call tech bros coming in to make a quick buck. And I'm talking people who really, they could have a technical background, they usually don't, but their primary motivation was to make a name for themselves. They wanted to be somebody above absolutely all else. And they were really having a psychotic moral compass, right? Really no regards for how things could be going. And the list really, really goes on in the different flavors. But for me, I put them all in the exact same bucket. And so, yeah, basically you're going to see, I don't want to be giving names because I don't want to be like putting anybody into a bad spot, but I'm sure you're going to start relating and understanding and digging into your own experiences and realizing that, yeah, I've worked for someone like this who was really kind of like, you know, Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate, pushing for directions that were obviously going to go wrong, that were obviously bypassing the standards that you had to be obeying for what you were doing. I think all of this, the tree that hides this, I'm going to call it the bullshit forest of all these categories, for me is the fail fast, fail often. And it's a bit of a shame because fail fast, fail often has a lot of merits, but people have forgotten where it came from, what was the context that it was in. When you work on things that are software related, and it's, you know, I used to say these things, you know, if you break Instagram, the worst case that's going to happen is you're going to piss off Kim Kardashian. But it's kind of the point, right? You're not going to break something that is fundamentally catastrophic. Now, it's not 100% true. There's critical systems running on software. There's a lot of things that could be tied on software, etc., right? But the point that I'm trying to make is It's very, very forgiving. But when you start working on hardware things become a little bit more tricky and difficult. And that's something that I've noticed. These types of founders, they just don't care about it. And why it matters is because, the year 2000 until 2015 was really a golden era of software. And it was mostly in the Silicon Valley, driven by nerds, driven by engineers who really wanted to build something because they just wanted to actually do it. And then post-financial crisis, there was a wave of people who were trying to create a wave, right? I describe a wave as being able to have a pitch behind something that is, gaining some public attention, some traction, usually because of some made-up promise of what this could actually be. And it has to be complicated enough that no one really understands how it works. But once you're in a group environment, people are all going to try to pretend that they know how it works. And in this context, you have the sweet spot for one of these psycho CEOs to come in and start doing, their thing, which is like the manufacturer complexity and the manufacturer a semblance of experience what they're trying to do. But as we picked up on trends, right? We had big data, IoT, a bunch of stuff like this. We actually started to move into hardware trends, right? So it was like, the drone stuff that really happened in 2015 and onwards. Now we have defense tech, which is going to be absolutely, catastrophic if we unleash CEOs like this in this environment. But there really was this entire reality that when you start working on different things, you need to have different kinds of spectrums of attention to the details, etc. Now, of course, when you touch people's money, like the case of FTX, it's a very, very big deal because, this is the kind of soft things that can have a life impact on people. But I work for several of these CEOs, several people who have been telling me over the years some crazy things. And I have dealt with this always in the same way. I'm particularly attached to the truth. And it's a difficult thing. The truth is not something that, you can just shake off. It's something that reveals itself over time. So you can be wrong on your way to actually get it there. But the real elements that show you that you're in bed with one of these people and they're going to take you all down or hurt someone or worse, what happened in Ocean Gate is they're quite telling. And when the things happen to you, my approach has always been the same, and I'm going to talk about this in a second. It's just that you got to move on. You got to let that train wreck do its things if you can't stop it, and then you got to move on. But there's a lot of red flags for you to identify these kind of founders. So the first thing I would say is that, and you got to be understanding that there's a level of intelligence in these people to be able to manipulate, to be able to craft a narrative that is plausible, to be able to actually tie it up to something that is logically defendable, but yet is complete bullshit. Because the true intention behind all of this rationale is a purely selfish, narcissistic angle for them. So I would say like a CEO that is obsessed about image perception. Now, image perception does matter, but if it is a level of an obsession, that's a red flag. And I'm going to give you a bit of a list of my list of things that I've noticed over the years, but I would not want to leave the impression that any one of these things is enough to identify a psycho CEO. It's more putting us as a bingo card or as a scorecard. If you have a lot of these things, the risk of having a person like this dramatically increases. If you have a person that is obsessed with cutting steps, that's a big red flag. If you have noticed that there's a musical chair at the engineering leadership side, that's a big red flag. Now, this documentary was touching on something that was interesting, but it was not really capturing it explicitly. And that is the overwhelming majority of engineer leaders do not like confrontations. And so for these psycho CEOs, it's a turkey shoot to manipulate these people and put them in position of, trying to side on the positive side of things. A funny thing I explain often is the difference between objectivity, neutrality, positivity, and negativity. And for the positivity and the negativity, the way I say it is that if you really don't know what's going to happen, being positive just means that you decided to choose that the positive outcome is going to happen. And being negative is the same, choosing negativity. The neutrality is just coming around saying like, I just don't know, right? Which touches on the objectivity by actually removing any kind of insecurity that you would have into it. But the real key part here is positivity and negativity. And the reason it matters is because you can bring a brilliant engineer and we all have tendency of being overly cautious in what we're doing, right? And then tell them a story of neutrality, objectivity, like, well, we don't really know, and then feed them a positivity story based off of this. And this is really where things happen. This is where you see these people getting sucked in into stories that deep down they feel is really, really going to go bad, but they're not really stepping in aggressively or with conviction, because precisely they will have that kind of personality. And we don't talk about this, but that's an important element, in my opinion, to understand that when you have an engineering leadership that is still going on with the train wreck, that might not be that they're on board with it. That might be that they got easily manipulated into continuing with the momentum of it. But eventually, there's these hard lines that you can cross, and this is where you start seeing engineering leadership was just like quitting, not confrontational, do not want to be doing things. I'll touch on retaliation, which was a topic of this documentary, which is super real in outside of this. It's extremely common. But that rotation is telling you that these people, they got past their point. Now, if you have an internal understanding of the engineering leader, and you have a person who is more introverted, who is more, amenable to things, and they actually decide to move on, it is particularly telling of the danger that you're facing. Another kind of musical chair that is significant is if you have product leadership or overall leadership that is actually happening. It usually dictates and tells you that these people have really tried. When you're at the senior level, you evolve in a lot of unknowns. And you go on with a mission, but the mission is an easy statement. Anybody can say they're going to make the world a better place. But you have really been part of the effort to choose the positive side of the unknown, and you're being a driving force. Well, when you let that go, you usually have also access to a lot of information you're not allowed to actually share. It's particularly telling about where the specific journey is going into. So now, let's talk about retaliation for 2 seconds. Like I said 2 seconds ago, retaliation is a very, very real thing. I have a lot of stories that I would like to be able to talk about publicly, but unfortunately I really can't. But on a personal basis, I haven't really been affected by it. And I'm not exactly sure, but I'm not going to be challenged in these things. I'm happy I'm not going to be receiving it. I'm not happy that I don't have to pick up the fight that I would pick up. But I have a lot of friends and people close to me who have been on the direct receiving end of the retaliation. And it's been brutal. And it's very much like they cover in the documentary in here, the legal system, the whistleblower protection, all the things that you hear about. The practical reality is they don't help you whatsoever. And if you are buying into this or you want to do the right thing, and I'm really, it's kind of crazy that I'm saying this, but I'm not advocating for you not to do it. But I'm kind of saying, like, if you're going to go down this rabbit hole, be ready, because you're not going to get protected. You're not going to get or anything. The legal system is designed to be slow, and it becomes very, very quickly a arm wrestle about a money arm wrestle. And you as an individual will always have less money than a company that has, investors behind them, etc. So do you really want to take that on? I don't think so. But then there's also the retaliation that happens behind doors, which is reputational retaliation, super common, right? People know each other in the industry, and they constantly check with each other, because you go in an interview, you go in any kind of interaction, you get to see the show that a person is putting in front of you. There's very little transparency. It's an active effort that you have to do, that have done, to get that person in front of you, not to give you the polished version of themselves, but the true themselves, so you know if there's an actual match. And understandable, because precisely there's a ton of retaliation in the industry. And in this particular case, it was no different. And that's kind of the part that I want to leave it there, is just that, you are involving in discovering these psychotic, and it's not a psychological video here, but I'm not pretending, but that I know what I'm talking about here, but they will go around these things, and you're going to have some of this signal. But I would say that retaliation, not only protect yourself from it, but it's also one of your huge sign of having it. And in this documentary, at some point, his director of engineering, he was going to talk about how he heard, I think the phrase was that the CEO had no problem spending $50,000 to destroy somebody's life. And I would say to you, and again, I'm smiling because I literally heard something similar in a previous position. When you're going to hear something like this, it's one of the mega red flags that you have. And you're going to ask yourself, a good friend of mine used to say this, is like, who does he think he is that we're not expect him to do that to us when we saw him doing it to someone else? But that's exactly this. If this retaliation is on the table, if this kind of behavior is on the table for an individual, it will be on the table for you. It will be on the table for another person. This is a defining moment about where the moral compass of this person is. And that's the part that, you want to be paying attention to. And as you see all these different elements, you're also going to see, and I'm going to leave it to the last one. There's, again, so many of these, but I'm already like a lot of time in the video and I want to talk about the rest. But there is inevitably a curation process that goes in. And that is another element. There's always curation in any company. There's, any company at any time, any point in time is in a different kind of journey that may or may not work for you, that may or may not fit the amount of time and patience they can have. There's a lot of very good legitimate reason for curation inside your staff. And I mean, when I use curation, it's like people leaving, you pushing them out. And that's normal. But if it becomes systemic around this conflict of the challenging of the CEO, that is one of the other huge red flag. Because what you're seeing in here is a CEO or a person in power, I'm using CEO because it's a documentary, who is actively creating a cult, right? You're actually just getting rid of anybody that would be challenging you to actually surround yourself with the people who are going to be thinking like you. The fascinating piece for me is that not only this is extremely toxic beyond any kind of other things you can do, and this documentary is very much showing you how bad it can be, but it can get much worse than this. But it's a failing strategy. It doesn't give you the product that is actually winning. It doesn't give you the company that is actually winning. And this is really kind of my point about why the best course of action is to move on, is because you are not going to be doing or saying or making anything that's going to change that level of delusion, right? And if it is a delusion of a CEO that thinks they're a genius, or that they think that it can actually tackle everything, whatever the level of the delusion is, the second it starts expressing itself through this kind of toxicity, something's going to go bad. Something's going to go very, very bad. Now, when things go bad, I usually say that nothing goes super bad out of one element. Things go super bad or super right out of an accumulation of successes or failures. And what we're describing in here is a system, is a behavioral system that is expressing itself into a company through the power of being the CEO that is here to create failures after failures, right? And, you can feel bad for this person. I think it's legitimate. But, and your little contribution, even at an executive level, even at a board member level. Yeah, I know investors who have dealt with situations like this with the founders, and they will just write off the entire investment because it's the best course of action for them to deal with this entire thing. But regardless, you just can't do anything. The system is just so rotten. You got to let it go. So the interesting part for me that I want to cover now is why do we get into such a rotten system? That really is a question I spent a lot of time, because it is insane how common it's been to find yourself in an OceanGate. Like I said, you have OceanGate in software, OceanGate in hardware. There's like all sorts of different things. And I'm going to give you like a quick drop of a couple of red flags that you would have. Candy title proliferation. A guy fresh out of school, promoted senior director, whatever, mega red flag. The systemic defending of a toxic element inside the company, this is also a mega red flag. The institutionalization of lies inside the company. So when you basically are going to have a culture of constantly trying to hide the truth or fabricate the truth or control where the flow of truth is. And I'll give you a couple of examples. All hands are being prepared so that we are like on the same page while we're communicating on things. Express, this is funny, I'm pulling all the list of the stuff. Express ask to convey a specific message, even though it is known by everybody that is not true. Asking for executive members no longer to participate in board meetings because you have the fear that investors will actually start to hear the truth of what's going on in the company. All of these things are true stories. And but they all lead to the exact same point. All right, back to how we got there. I think that there is a feedback loop in place right now where if you're a psycho CEO like this, you're actually being rewarded for it. And I want to give you a super quick, because I'm already getting long. This video is going to be a little bit longer because I think it's an important piece. But basically, if you're coming out of the woods with zero credential, a masterful skill at talking your way through anything, you have a high chance of success of raising money. And then if your job is just to, produce a return on investment, you don't need a successful company. You need a successful exit. And that is basically selling the equity. There is a this is mostly going to be for those who aren't in executive position or a founder position. But there's a very strict distinction between the people in the company who are building the product and selling the product, and the people in the company who are building the company and selling the company. And an investor, most investors, there's of course exceptions, they're looking at the product as a mean to build the company and sell the company. That's what they're trying to sell. But if you have someone who's a smooth talker and they know how to sell anything that they would have, what's preventing them of just building a company and just like passing it on to an exit somewhere else? I'm sure if you think for a second, you have seen headlines of acquisitions that made no sense to you. You've seen acquisitions of companies that ended up being liquidated 2-3 years after that, and you're probably on the side, not without any information, was wondering what the hell was going on. It's like, what happened there? Why is this thing even allowed to be there? Well, it's just that most likely on the positive side of things is someone like this was very good at selling what this was. And no one really wants to talk about it, specifically in Silicon Valley. No one will really talk openly about the failures. No one really want to discuss about the lesson learned and move on. This all happens behind closed doors. We all want to maintain the positivity and the momentum, which is it's a good thing, in my opinion, overall. But there is still this reward. We are not going around. It's been a overbidding of exaggeration and overselling things, etc. And that has, by the point I was trying to make on a personality, progressively sanctioned the engineer technical founder who tends to be more honest, who tends to be more truthful, who tends to be more cautious, who tends to be more factual than the tech bro who will just tell you you're going to have it next week even though they haven't even stopped thinking about this, who's going to tell you that they're going to be raising and winning the contract that hasn't even been decided yet. We're going to go around. And if there's an element of pump and dump that is almost omnipresent at this point, where everybody has an incentive, or just like you create a company, you put some equity in some round, arbitrary valuation, a couple of stories together, you glue this, you mush it up, you prop it up, and then you offload it in someone else. Everybody got rich except the poor guy who ended up buying this stuff on the way out. And that's why you have this entire feedback loop. Now I'm of course simplifying these things, and I'm sure that people are going to have an element of this that I don't have, and I'm very interested in hearing it. But this is something that I've seen happening, and why it's dangerous. I mean, we talk about the OceanGate, but let's talk the systemic trend that is behind this. The risk profile is changing. So the tech industry right now has changed. It's something I've seen with a lot of engineers. A lot of the companies that are $1 trillion, FANGs, whatever, the $1 trillion companies, most of them come from the consumer tech world, right? And that has a completely different risk profile than going and trying to visit the Titanic. It was low risk, right? Because if something goes wrong, it was what we used to call technology as gadgets, right? If you're old enough, in the 2000s, your phone was a gadget, your laptop was a gadget. And if over time, this has changed, right? You can't really live your life now anymore if you don't have a phone or if you have a connection to the internet or you know how to actually use it. These things are no longer, bonuses. They're mandatory. And if you can't relate to this, I invite you to talk to an elderly person, I would say 70 and above, and ask them, how do they navigate society for medical appointments, for government and relations, for any kind of official procedure without having someone around them that actually can help them navigate this world? And I would take the bet that you'll find that they feel pretty disconnected from this. So consumer has evolved into becoming these things, but it was still low risk. Now it's a little bit more risk. Software was low risk. That's where the whole fail fast, fail often made sense. The point was just like, don't overthink stuff, right? The point of fail fast, fail often was basically to tell you that whatever thinking process you do ahead of time will never be as good as the feedback you'll get from your customers and your users the second they put their hand on your product, right? It's just that fail fast, fail often is wonderful, right? It's super catchy, it's super trendy, it's great. But that was still nevertheless low risk software because, nothing is really going on. Now, of course, if it's a software that runs, the stock market and everything starts flying down, this is a different story. It's going to have real impact. But overall, it was low risk. But hardware tech is high risk. And it's getting, it always has been, but it's going to be more, right? If your phone explodes in your pocket, there's risk of injury, right? And I'm using something that is very consumer because if your submarine fail, everybody dies, right? But if your car fails, if your Tesla autopilot is not working, you crash, you die. There's been all this thing. Hardware is higher risk by default. And that's why, historically speaking, hardware was having a more stringent testing and quality control steps that will come with it because of the higher risk that you would have. Enterprise tech is higher risk. We're back into my software example with Wall Street. Wall Street is an enterprise customer. And defense tech is higher risk for all of the things that we just mentioned before, plus the risk profile that they're bringing in. But you could put, defense with space tech as well, right? You really have a risk profile that is different when you're actually going in there. Now, why am I making this thing? So I touched for a second. Consumer tech is changing from being an accessory to being mandatory. But as you start seeing the bigger trend in all the tech that has been going on, consumer tech is now behind the scene. Defense tech is super trendy right now. But everybody's going towards more enterprise tech, more hardware, more integrated. Because making an app on the store doesn't really have, the baggage that it used to have. That moment has, eclipsed itself a little bit. Now people want to have products who are a lot more integrated, hardware and software, different kinds of systems. The tech today is a lot more layered. It has more depth in the complexities. Not the layers itself aren't necessarily more complex. I would say they're probably a lot easier to build because of the tool that we have, but the depth got more complicated. And this depth and the shift towards enterprise and defense means that we're overall working on things that are more risky. And so if you have a system that is rewarding people who have a toxic mentality, one that rewards taking delusional risks, and the entire trend is going towards working on things that are more rich but more risky, this is a ticking time bomb. This is a ticking time bomb, one that I think we've been slowly seeing exploding bit by bit. And that particular story of the OceanGate is actually capturing in this microcosm. And this is, what I mean is like it's and no mean disrespect for the families who died in this thing, but it's just one sub in one little thing, etc. What if tomorrow it's the systemic things on airplanes, which may be the case with what's going on with Boeing, and I don't even know the topic well enough. What is with cars, with maybe the case of what's been going on with Tesla and other pilots, is that there's something out there much bigger in terms of impact that can happen because of the technological products that this could have a major impact on, and we haven't seen it yet. And so far, as a society, we satisfy ourselves with the headline of saying, all right, SBF did fraud, now he goes to jail. And same for Elizabeth Holmes. She did her fraud, she goes to jail. But we really, in my opinion, need something that is going to be not possible through laws. We need, first of all, people who are going to be capable of protecting themselves. And I'm going to touch in a second in my own particular aspect, even though I touched on this a little bit. But we also need a society and industry that is paying more attention to who gets rewarded for what they're doing, because getting to the finishing line is not the only thing that matters. How you get to the finishing line matters as well. And because as the few that will get to the finishing line with this approach to things, and I'm not advocating for not taking risks. It's kind of crazy, but I'm advocating against delusion, which would think that this is not something you have to do. But here we are. But right now, for those of you who are engineers, product, and founders, kind of like, the people I'm making this content for, I want to leave you to the, I give you the point about, detecting and identifying people like this and protecting yourself and moving on, which is not as easy as I'm saying it. But I will leave you with one last thing. There was this man who died in the sub, Paul-Henri Nargeolet. And the part that was interesting for me, how I related to him, is because, so my career is kind of like an iceberg. Most people only pay attention to the very top that is very visible. But I don't really lose sight of the entire journey and the entire thing and the entire position. But that tip of the iceberg of my career is kind of like a brand at this point. And kind of like Mr. Nargeolet had as being the Titanic guy. And these people, these CEOs, they will shamelessly use that brand to legitimate their delusion and the insanity that they're doing, all the way to the point of risking your reputation, your brand, your life in this particular case. And that's why it's particularly important to do these things. Now, again, I will not give names, but I know for a fact that some people have been using me directly as a way of rubber stamping what they were trying to attempt to do. And it's in the grand scheme of all the things that's put at risk, it's probably definitely not on the top of the list. Probably, barely worth noting. But this is where this whole thing became very serious for me, and where I looked at this thing, because I was thinking about, listening to his daughter. And I was thinking like, yeah, this poor guy, really was trying to get something going and moving. And there's just this crazy guy, this Stockton Rush, out of a very pathetic attempt of proving that he was right of using carbon fiber for subs. Like, who the hell cares, right? Just went around and then, risked this guy's life and killed him. And that's the part that I want to kind of leave you with it, is that, of course I smiled throughout the video because of the uncanniness of the parallels with my life and how common this is, and how a documentary like this will leave you to think that these are edge cases. And I'm here to tell you that they're not, that they're everywhere. And they happen in, smaller factor and everything. That's the smile. It's not that I'm not laughing. I'm just like, what are the odds? What are the odds of something? But in the end, my advice to you all is just be on the lookout, pay attention, stay away from these people. Join adventures that are going to be worth. There's, of course, a lot of unknown. But delusion is not any way to handle any kind of unknown, right? That's it.